Good evening in the Galilee, Boker Tov in Santa Barbara. My name's Wayne Firestone. I'm the Executive Director of the America-Israel Friendship League, and I'm thrilled to be here with you today in our continuing series. We at America-Israel Friendship League do one thing. We try to make friends, and we have assembled today a group of people who know how to do that in good times and in tough times. And really, we've been through a tough time together for a long period, but we want to bring you some joy. We want to bring you some, hopefully some hope and faith and charity. And we are going to explore those very topics today with colleagues from throughout the Bay Area who are famous for having big hearts. So we'd love for everybody, whether you are a local or a long distance fan of the Bay Area, tell us where you're calling in from today and send us some love, because we know we all need a little more of it each day. And over the course of the next hour, we hope to bring you some really point examples of how different elements of the faith community have really risen to the task. This is part of a series we've been doing now with different communities. We had the opportunity earlier in the year to meet the Consul General, Shlomi Kaufman, and his team on a very different topic, the great work and collaboration between firefighters in Israel and in California. Truly an inspiring story. And I guess the reality is, Shlomi, we are dealing with multiple crises these days. There's just no getting around that. Natural disasters, health disasters, human disasters. And it's really been a pleasure to have and understand deeply how it is we collaborate, how we work together, and pray with each other and pray for each other during these most challenging times. Shlomi, you should know, is the Consul General of Israel to the Pacific Northwest. He's based physically in San Francisco. He has a 20-year diplomatic career with the Israel Foreign Ministry. He served in New York and DC. He's been in Shanghai. He's been in Thailand, and of course in Jerusalem. He's also worked in high tech, so he has familiarity with the Silicon Valley area, even from before taking this position. So Shlomi, let me turn over to you to just sort of introduce our segment today, and then we'll proceed with the rest of the panel.
Thank you, Wayne, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and it's great to be with you again, Wayne and your team, and thank you for making friends, and thank you for bridging and thank you for doing this sacred and important work of bringing Israeli and Americans together and for joint conversations on different issues, which are issues of concern and issues that we all deal together. And I'm honored to be with my great friends in this event with Soma from the Indo-American community, Diane Fisher from Silicon Valley, Michael Pappas, of course, my great friend from JCRC, Council. Michael, thank you so much for so many years of work. And of course, Rabbi Michael Lezert, who is doing this sacred work with Glide community, helping the really, really needy people in San Francisco. And you guys are all of you here are inspiration for hope, an inspiration for faith, an inspiration for giving. And this inspiration inspires us all and inspires so many people around you and around us, and really an example. What I want to say about it, maybe say a few words about this past year. I want to focus on the word togetherness. And as I mentioned earlier, we're all together in this. And this is what brings us as humans. We have so much in common, and we have also our differences. And our differences and our commonality this is what makes us so beautiful, diverse, and interesting. But in the times of crisis, we all come together. We focus on what is common between us, what is on our survival and our hope. And the faith is not an issue, and the differences are not an issue, because we all fight for, and we hope for the survival and for a better future. In this past year, we all experienced a very significant challenge, agony, despair in many cases, and death for 500,000 Americans passed away as a result of the pandemic, 5,000 Israelis, and so many hundreds and thousands in the world. And this past year really brought us together in the sense of fighting together for the good cause of, first of all, being together in this tragedy, but also trying to fight together to get out of it, to fight for the vaccine, to fight for the cure, to help the people. And the differences were not an issue. The differences were pushed aside. For the Israeli consulate here in San Francisco, but also other nations, we feel part of this community here. And we tried to help and be part of the community also in alleviating and helping them to get out of it. And we did this through several events, in different occasions. We did it with Glide, that we try to help as much as we can. We did it with JFCS, with Jewish Family and Children's Services, where we volunteered. We did it with Israel, delivering food. And we try to reach out and give back, to give people hope, but also to help them with what they need. And that was, when I say we come together, this is what I mean. We come together to help each other. So, and representing the state of Israel here, I would say that Israel is part doing the same thing, part of the world community, part of the global community, whether by sending vaccines, whether by sharing its knowledge that we accumulated in the past year for the benefit of the humanity. So I'm really, happy for this panel, for this opportunity to talk, because it's just a great opportunity to show how we come together and how we bring our differences and our commonalities for the good, for the benefit of the humanity, for the benefit of our community, and for the benefit of the people. And for the end, I want to say we are, this weekend we're celebrating the festival of Purim, the Jewish festival of Purim, which today we celebrated as something, as an event, as a festive, as a happiness, as an event of happiness and joy, but it's also symbols the victory over the evil and how we came together, and our hope and our faith in this event as well. So thank you so much. Thank you for being here this morning, this afternoon, this evening. Wayne and your team, thank you so much. And thank you for my dear, dear friends in the community for what you're doing day in and day night. And thank you for being here today.
Well, that's a great reflection. And indeed, we have a group of colleagues here that know each other well, have worked with each other both in celebration and in challenge. And we're actually going to explore both of those themes and more now. So you heard from Consul General Koithman, the panelists and their respective communities. Let me just jump in now and introduce first Michael Pappas, the director of the San Francisco Interfaith Council. I learned from Michael that your organization, born over 34 years ago, was born of crisis, actually more than one crisis. But you had to pivot your organization, obviously, and bring together a lot of different stakeholders. If I understand, over 800 different community organizations and congregations Give us some insight as to what that pivot has looked like and felt like, and by way of introduction.
Certainly, and thank you, Wayne, for this gracious invitation. And it's always wonderful to be with the Consul General. He's been a wonderful collaborator. I was looking at the calendar, and 2 days from today, I think, we will have been gathered in the Emergency Operations Center in San Francisco, which is the home base, if you will, for the Department of Emergency Management. And what happened at that point was the mayor declared a state of emergency, which activated something called the community branch. And so stakeholders from all sectors of San Francisco were gathered and basically deputized to become liaisons with their particular sectors. Us in particular for the communities of faith. As you mentioned, we were born out of two crises, a homeless crisis and the Loma Prieta earthquake. And I've been in this position for 14 years, and I just anticipated that our big crisis was going to be an earthquake. Didn't think it was going to be this. And so we had to all figure this out as we were going along. Essentially, what the city asked of us was to be their voice and to move information to our respective constituencies. And our constituencies are varied. It's not just the communities of faith, but we have what are called judicatories, like the Archdiocese and the Northern California Board of Rabbis and the like, that are headquartered here and have a regional scope. We also work with the academic and healthcare institutions that have religious affiliations. And since the Great Recession, we've been convening the CEOs of the major faith-based social service agencies. So each one of them is playing a different role in this crisis. So we have been basically moving information out, everything from official communications, aggressive recommendations, and health order revisions, and getting clarity because some of them are very, very complex, as well as we've been given a tech team. And so we've been, and access to some of the highest level folk from different departments, from the mayor's office, from Speaker Pelosi and others, to do weekly online briefings for our faith leaders. Collectively, and it's interesting because the mayor asked me to speak with her at a press conference just before Christmas and Hanukkah, and what we talked about was the fact that all of this information that has gotten to our stakeholders and to our constituents has enabled them to make informed decisions on behalf of the people that they've been charged with and with whom they have spiritual care. And so overnight, our communities of faith pivoted to online worship and virtual ministry. And basically, they've been charged with cultivating community in the midst of isolation. They're playing a unique role pastorally in this as well. My concern certainly is that this is a story of the haves and the have-nots. Those with the resources are even claiming that their attendance is up, and that in many cases giving is up. But those who don't have the resources, they're the ones who are struggling. And so we are trying to address those equity issues as well. I would just say, and I think my time is coming to an end, I'm also a dad, and I have three beautiful children, one 26, twins that are 20, and so my eldest, the impact has hit us personally as well. My eldest, who anticipated the big fat Greek wedding, has had to postpone it now twice, and my twins were deprived the rite of passage of a high school graduation, and now are studying, one online and the other in Arizona. And he contracted the virus early on with half the lacrosse team. But what this has all shown me is really the resilience of my own family as well as those people that we are serving.
Michael, thanks so much for sharing that. I think everybody on the call is anticipating dancing at your big fat Greek wedding, I would assume, at least. But it is indeed the case that people are navigating this on multiple levels, and indeed, when we thought about the Silicon Valley area as a region, the rest of the world thinks of it certainly as a place that's intensely busy. And Soma Chatterjee, who I had the pleasure to meet beforehand, really has a unique perspective walking around Silicon Valley, because she does so with a couple of hats, working in the area and in the region, but also as the interfaith coordinator for the Hindu American Foundation and a board member of the Silicon Valley Interreligious Council. So we all have our stereotypes and preconceptions of busy Silicon Valley people. Tell us a little bit, some of what you've seen both personally and with your intercommunal efforts that's actually helped people get through and cope in different ways during this period.
Thank you, Wayne. Good morning and good evening to everybody. This is so heartwarming. It's amazing to be here with you all today. It's a beautiful morning in San Francisco Bay Area. And yes, so last year brought us many changes, on our personal levels, in our public space. And from Hindu American Foundation, we hosted a number of interfaith events to stay connected with our community, to help us help each other build resilience. Last year, I participated in food and blanket drive efforts as well for community members who were at risk. And we had, we were able to stick together and do things together. So today I wanted to share with you, my personal experience, something that has helped me immensely to cope up with this crisis situation. So to think about it, all these that are happening in the world today, the pandemic, the political upheavals, mass migrations, lot of challenges, health challenges that we are seeing. This has happened in the world before. And our innate, inherent human qualities of compassion, empathy, charitable thoughts and actions, these are also humans. We have known this, over generations, and this has been, it's there in our genetic memory passed via DNA, RNA. But oftentimes, like Wayne mentioned, it's a very busy life and it's chaotic, the randomness we sometimes observe in nature, called entropy. Similarly, our lives have been, very disturbed, and our minds have been disturbed. Body has not been to the best position. But like in nature, we have counter forces like gravitational forces and electromagnetic forces that bring things together, that help us stay rooted. So in this moment of crisis, I thought it's an opportunity as well for us to open up our hearts and realize that we are part of a greater truth. We are part of a bigger picture. And something unique that we are living, we are seeing, observing in this day and time is this gamut of information that is showered to us. Of course, it's incredibly important to stay aware. And I thank Michael Pappas. I follow his emails every week to see what's going on, in the Bay Area and how we can help each other in terms of healthcare and community service. But at the same time, we are bombarded with a lot of information coming from all different kinds of sources, from media, academia, from elected officials, from Hollywood celebrities. And there's information, and it's important for us to make that choice to discern what's right from wrong, the information that is it actually helping us? Is it, kind of empowering us in a positive and a constructive manner? So how to discern that? So as per our ancestral wisdom, the Vedic philosophers, they recommended a number of meditative practices so that we are able to channelize, connect our mind, body, and the subtle heart, the soul, or the consciousness with the cosmic energy, the gravitational and the electromagnetic forces, the universe around us. So if we are able to feel that oneness with the universe and declutter our mind and focus on what is most important to us, our priorities, in the face of a crisis, an existential crisis, I think that would be very helpful, and it has been immensely powerful to me personally. I started meditations last year, and the basic principles are the same, although, there are many different techniques and people meditate in many ways. Something that helped me personally was to, sit cross-legged position outside in the backyard, grounding myself and closing my eyes and focusing on the midpoint of my eyebrows and focusing on my breath and chanting. When I focus on the sound energy, to help me concentrate, focus more, and kind of, work with decluttering my mind so that I'm able to discern from right from wrong, the information that would be empowering, and it would inspire me to give myself holistically for the service of the community. So that has been very helpful to me. So in the face of a crisis, I would say it's an opportunity for us to also go back to our core, our basic human nature of our ability to breathe, to nourish our souls with good food and water, which is a challenge these days. But so we have to be more mindful of what we are eating and where the food is being sourced from, and able to contemplate on the higher realization so that we have the moral courage, we have the confidence to do this together. So before I end, I would just like to quickly invoke a Vedic mantra, a chant, which is a peace chant dedicated to everybody in the world, for all of us around the world. So it basically talks about the infinitude of the universe. So when we feel one with the universe, we feel wholesome and we are able to give ourselves holistically. So it's Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamiva Vasishvate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Thank you.
Thank you, Soma. Thank you so much for sharing your voice. Thank you so much for sharing those insights. Rabbi Michael Lezak has the distinction of heading the Center for Social Justice at GLIDE, which, if you look at their website, describes themselves as a radically inclusive, just, and loving community. And what I've heard from friends and colleagues who are from the Bay Area is that you actually have to experience GLIDE in person to fully understand what all of those things mean. So maybe, Michael, you could share with us a little bit, give us a snapshot of what this has looked like in your work to really work with some of the most hardly affected, the most challenged people economically during these multiple crises.
Thank you so much, Wayne. Thanks, Shlomi. Thanks for your hospitality and welcoming me and all of us. It's great to be learning from all of you this morning. So yeah, I'm a rabbi, an out and practicing Jew who works at a GLIDE, which kind of falls into two categories. It is both a historically Black church, which has a 50-member gospel ensemble, that online is amazing, but in person, when this pandemic is over, I want to invite you all to join me on a Sunday morning. It will change your life and infuse you with hope and soul and connective tissue that I'm going to have the chutzpah to say, like, I think your soul needs. It's a reminder of the promise of hope and healing and helping us cross lines that we don't usually cross in America. On top of Glide being a church, it is also a justice juggernaut in the middle of the Tenderloin. We pivoted very quickly when COVID came down. We still serve over 2,000 meals every day of the year. We distribute 1.5 million needles to people wrestling with addiction. We help men unlearn violence. We have an alternative to incarceration program. We have a women's center, a walk-in center that helps people get shelter. We were key in helping to pivot 1,500 people who were sleeping on the streets who are now in shelter-in-place hotels. And we helped get Prop C on the ballot that helping to put money into San Francisco's budget to think about wraparound services. Look, I feel like I live in two separate Americas every day, right? I live in Lower Pacific Heights and I walk to Glide, and I walk from a predominantly Caucasian part of town to one of the only areas where you can reliably find African Americans in San Francisco, and that is in the Tenderloin. And I walk from what I feels like first world wealth to third world poverty. And I think we see this in cities across the country. And COVID has only exacerbated these challenges. I can say to you this, I do three big things at Glide. I do broad outreach to the Jewish community, using Glide and the Tenderloin as a justice laboratory and classroom to bring pre-COVID hundreds of people from the Jewish community in to serve, to get close and to think about how they might actualize the holy potential within them to be healers in their town and in their country. So broad outreach to the Jewish community. I do a training for police officers and district attorneys to help make them more compassionate in their work. We call that program An Officer and a Mensch. We meet quarterly to help people rethink how they might use their weapons less and their heart more. And we run an annual justice pilgrimage to Montgomery, Alabama. And we were there March 1st through 5th as the COVID tsunami was kind of crashing over North America. I was there with 110 people from San Francisco, including 25 senior leaders from UCSF. And we were visiting the museum that Brian Stevenson and the Equal Justice Initiative opened. The museum connects the dots from slavery to mass incarceration. And there's a memorial that remembers 4,400 known African-American victims of lynching. It's the most haunting architecture I know in America. It's a loose equivalent to an American Yad Vashem. And we were there thinking about the through line of not just slavery to mass incarceration, but to mass poverty of people of color and to radical inequities in healthcare. Hold this fact, that about 25 years ago, the population of San Francisco that was African Americans was about 22%. It's now about 4%. Yet 37% of our unsheltered people in San Francisco are African American. So Brian Stevenson, who founded EJI, who was one of my justice heroes, you should read his book Just Mercy before Purim. He said slavery didn't end in 1865; it just took on new forms. So I'm in this incredible position where I feel wildly alive Jewishly and as an American, and I'm summoning the prophetic texts of my people, and I think of the founders of this country, to help think about how the Jewish people have flourished here in San Francisco and how we might use our power to help this entire city, no matter your race or religion, to thrive. These stories regularly shatter my heart. I was serving breakfast with my daughter at Glide at 6 a.m. yesterday. And as I was driving up the hill, I saw an elderly Asian woman walking up the hill and a homeless man take a swing at this 75-year-old woman. And I think so often we run to our head, we run away from our heart. And I think our work in these times, I think when we allow our hearts to be shattered, then we can begin to pull the pieces together. And I'm always drawn to Psalm 147, verse 3, that calls God the healer of shattered hearts. And I think more so than ever, this is the work that we have been summoned to at a time of radical divisiveness, when we put up walls and point fingers. When we push the pause on that and actualize the 4 points in Brian Stevenson's TED Talk, when we think about getting proximate and looking other people in the eye, when we summon new narratives to imagine that it's not just Jew over there and Christian over there and black over there and white over there, but actually that we're in this together. 3, he said we have to hold on to hope. I think of Hatikva. He said the opposite of hope is injustice. If I don't believe I can turn Ellis Street, then I might as well go get a tan in Boca Raton, right? And the last one he said is that we have to do uncomfortable things. By no means is it easy to walk through the Tenderloin and to see people injecting or using the street as a bathroom because the city has not committed enough money to build bathrooms for people. It is hard, but I believe when we actualize those 4 points, we can be of the greatest service, which is why I think we are here. So thank you.
Amen. And thank you, Rabbi, also for sharing the teachable moments for multiple generations in our family at this time. Our sons and daughters are experiencing this, as Michael Pappas said, through a different lens and with their peers. And I actually want to swing back to that. We'll get back to that in the discussion. Diane Fisher is the director of the Jewish Community Relations Council in Silicon Valley, an organization that is well known for having deep ties in each of the communities where they serve. And Diane, I know from your colleagues that you work with on the screen and off the screen that the issues that we've put on the table today are ones that your organization is deeply involved in trying to address and look at it from multiple levels, legislatively as well as direct service. Can you tell us a little bit about what this looks like in Silicon Valley for you, and whether technology, even maybe there's some silver linings? Are there some things that technology can do that are helpful in periods of crisis as people are working their way through the multiple challenges?
Thank you, Wayne. I'm so glad to be part of this friendship circle that we have here on webinar today. I want to start with how you began this session of talking about friendship. That is not a trivial matter, and whether we're in Silicon Valley or our listeners all over, right? This is what my work is about, right? So I've been the director of the Jewish Community Relations Council in Silicon Valley for 15 years, after spending 20 years as a software engineer here. And for quite some time, most of my relatives thought I must be doing this as a volunteer, right? Who would pay you to make friends with diverse people, right, as a full-time endeavor? But it's actually a serious business, right, to build community and intentionally make friends. About 20 years ago, I was profoundly touched by Robert Putnam's book, Bowling Alone, right? And it's not surprising that in 2020, they released a new edition of that book, right? And his theory was that American civic engagement, everything from religious affiliation to bowling leagues, was in decline, right? And as a result, we all had less social capital, less empathy, less common cause, less trust and cooperation, and overall a poorer society as a result. But sitting in a nonprofit whose purpose is to build social capital, right? That is my job. I have observed that people are craving that connection and that belonging, right? But they want those affiliations to be really meaningful, right? You can't rely on like tradition or a sense of obligation or habit to get people to join the Lions Club or Hadassah or your local church, right? But people are looking for affiliations that provide them with the opportunity to do something bigger than themselves personally, right? And that improves the world in some way. And I really saw my job change radically about 5 years ago with the political divisiveness and isolationist policies of our government. People started calling me, right? That didn't happen before, and saying, how can I get involved, right? before I was kind of chasing after, hoping to find people, and now people were finding the JCRC, right? And asking, what can I do, right? And then, of course, when the pandemic hit, even more so, right? Everybody was looking for, how can I find a path to help other people? I'll share just a small anecdote. Months into the shutdown, when our building in Silicon Valley, right, had been closed for everything except for the outdoor fitness center, I came by briefly just to pick up some books from my office, and there was an elderly gentleman sitting in the lobby, and I asked if I could help him, and he said, well, I've been calling the office for weeks and no one's in the office, so no one answered the phone, but so I decided to just walk over and sit here in the lobby because I want to make a donation. I want to help, right? And I'm sitting here with the check, you know, and whoever will take it, right? And it was just like very, very classic example of people will really step up in these moments. In Jewish tradition, what that gentleman wanted to do, we called tzedakah, right? Giving charity, although is not really charity, it's the root word is tzedek, making justice with your funds, right? And we also use the word chesed for deeds of loving kindness, basically just, you know, bringing food and blankets and working at Glide, right, is chesed work. But that root of tzedek, which is that justice word, that's really what the JCRC has traditionally been more about, which is the advocacy work, to look at the root causes, like the rabbi was speaking about. Why are there so many poor people? Why do we have this horrific two Silicon Valleys, and we see it all, you know, in many cities, right? And looking at what we can do to change those dynamics and change the root causes. During the pandemic, I think so many of our organizations that have traditionally worked on income inequality and affordable housing and all of these issues have started to really turn our focus to the racial inequities that are the core problem that we need to address to really repair our country. So right now, that's where the JCRC work has been in Santa Clara County, working on criminal justice reform issues with partners in the community, specifically on things like the mobile crisis unit that's modeled on the Cahoots effort in Oregon. And I'm answering those calls still. But what I want to say to your question, thinking about technology, honestly, I think it's the most simple technology that has been the most valuable in these times, which is the telephone. You know, I mean, we're on Zoom, this is great, right? But what all of our institutions have done is create phone trees, call people, right? I belong to a synagogue of almost 600 families. Every single family was phoned, right? At some point, and just to check in and say, how are you doing, right? At the JCC, we had a J Buddies program. All the seniors that used to come to a senior program got buddied up with someone who calls them weekly, just to check in, and right? And so that aspect of our mental health and our need for just a personal conversation, I think is really where our faith institutions have done a good job. It's sort of old technology that I think is new again.
Thanks, Diane, and thanks for raising the issue of the mental health. It's something that we don't always talk about out loud, and yet I think this the crisis has exposed the significant challenges on that front from lots of different sectors that perhaps were less well known. Michael Pappas, I want to go back to you. You have a unique perch of seeing the faith-based community in some. How are faith leaders doing during this crisis? Certainly they may have more participants in their congregational events online, as you mentioned, but they're probably also attending more funerals. They're also having difficult conversations about mental health and other physical and economic challenges that their communities are facing. Have you found that your organization also has to sort of keep track of how they're doing?
Thank you for that question, because I think that they're doing a spectacular job at checking in with their congregants. I mean, I attend Grace Cathedral, and one of the junior associates called me just to see how I was doing. This was early on in the pandemic, and I can't tell you, from our perch, how good that made me feel. And, I took the lead of that person and really every week have been calling my colleagues just to check in on them as well. You talked about the multifaceted nature of this pandemic. We're seeing all kinds of unemployment, mental health issues, economic issues, as well as fear and isolation. And so I think that those who are being called to lead and being called to cultivate community in the midst of isolation need to be cared for too. Care for the caregiver, if you will. I think one of the beauties of an organization like ours with over a 30-year history is that we've spent most of our time doing relationship building. So in times of crisis, we know one another and we can reach out to one another in meaningful ways and check in. And the responses that I've been getting just to those check-ins has been pretty profound. And it's been rewarding and fulfilling on our end. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, no, I think obviously people doing this work in rise to the challenge in time of crises on the one hand. On the other hand, I think this has gone on longer than many had anticipated. And even for those of us that are radical optimists, recognize we ain't out of it yet. We have a lot in front of us. And so the long-term sustainability of frontline providers for healthcare, we started to recognize. One of our earliest webinars we did was with people who worked in emergency rooms in hospitals in Israel and in the United States who were treating patients in emergency rooms with the new restrictions and concerns about their own health because of the spread of the virus. And it was recognition, and obviously the healthcare system has had a look at that systemically, but in the context of the work that you're all doing of heart, head, and hands, of touching and hugging, the normal things that your congregants, that your leaders of communities are doing. I recognize that this has provided a systemic challenge in addition to the individual challenges.
Wayne, I really believe that the greatest challenges are going to be ahead, and that is going to be navigating folks from isolation back into connectivity, because I think we've become so conditioned because of the long-term nature of what we're experiencing now. The one thing you did bring up, and I think we've tried really to lift up our chaplains in hospitals, because they are the only faith presence that is being able to connect those who are, at death's door in many cases and sick with their loved ones, and as well as being this warm source of love in a hospital setting, which can be very antiseptic. So that's a whole nother constituency of ours that we've been really trying to care for as well.
So I'm going to come back to you on this question of connectivity that Michael just raised. And I've been thinking about your recognition of the need to both sort of
self-reflection,
reflective place. But how do we emerge from that, able to be more empathetic to what, the challenges that we know other people are facing, even as we ourselves are feeling vulnerable or fearful or anxious?
Right. So in my personal experience coming from the Eastern traditions, we did conduct a lot of online meditative Sangha collaborations so that all of us feel that sense of oneness with each other within our community, in our interfaith circle, in our communities which are vulnerable And so that self-reflection, guided meditation actually helped very much. And these innate qualities, our human qualities of empathy and compassion and inspiration to be with one another, to be for one another, it actually comes out automatically. It helps us to mitigate fear and anxiety, insecurity of many folds, that's coming our way from all different sources, and the panic in the community. So I think it's immensely powerful to feel that we are not alone. We are all in this together, and we have this connection with the universe, which is so great, so fulfilling. So I think from that we can derive this strength of resilience, and that we are moving towards progress and sustainability, and we will survive this, and we will not only survive, but we will thrive, and we'll make it happen. So that promise comes in.
That's great. Rabbi Lezak, as I listened to the description of the stuff you actually do at Glide and how you describe yourself in the community, I guess my question is this a model that could only happen in San Francisco, or do you think we could all be studying Bryan Stevenson, like that's Torah as well, and having other examples around the country and around the world, for that matter, with an out rabbi working at a Black historical church, working with the poorest and most vulnerable people? Is that an exception for San Francisco, or is that a possible model or a vision of the future?
Thanks, Wayne. I can just tell you, when I host hundreds of people at Glide a year, including dozens of Israelis from Tel Aviv and from Jerusalem, who are shattered when they see that they can't believe that a kilometer from Twitter that is so wealthy that there is this kind of poverty. They can't imagine that this happens in America. And then they walk into Glide and see this and think, how might this apply in Tel Aviv? How might this apply in Jerusalem? Mm-hmm. So I have rabbi friends in both cities that think, like, what would a Glide in Jerusalem or Tel Aviv look like? And absolutely this can apply in just, I think, many cities across America and across the world, of when we show up with hearts filled with love, unconditional love, and welcome people radically, and show up confidently in who we are, and drop the competitive gene and think, how might I show up with real humility and learn from others, and try to think about the power that we have, both heart power, political power, relational power, financial power, to begin healing the cities in which we live and the countries that are hurting. I think we 200 challahs in the Glide kitchen, right? And then we walk those challahs both throughout the building. One of my original funders said, you have to feed the people who feed people. And then we walk those challahs also to the local police station and to the local child care center. And I as an out rabbi am walking hot Jewish Sabbath bread around the city. And it is bringing smiles, it is feeding people's tummies, and it is a way to say, like, hey, we're in this together. And so I'm regularly thinking about how might this be replicated. So undoubtedly,
that's a great vision.
Yeah, I was thinking about the relationship building also that happens, in your example, because I've also had the great fortune to travel twice to Birmingham before Bryan Stevenson's museum was built, with a group organized through the Jewish Council for Public Affairs, paired African-American and Jewish leaders, right? Where we walked the path of the civil rights movement together. And then more recently, visiting again to go to the museum and go to the memorial site. But doing it together in pairs of folks and learning, as you said, from each other is powerful. Like I think that's one of the things we're really, we'll be looking forward to do, when the pandemic is over, because traveling together and experiencing together and learning from each other in that dynamic experience last. Like the people that I did that with, 15 years ago are still very much in relationship with me now, and are the people that we're able to work through the pandemic with now because of that experience.
No, undoubtedly. And I would say the 25 leaders from UCSF who were with me this year, we've met weekly every Wednesday night to think about the through line from racial inequities that we saw on the ground in Alabama to racial inequities we see at UCSF. And it has become an interfaith, interclass justice minion of connectivity and helping us love one another and laugh and cry, and then think about how we might use our seats of power to bring effective change. So it's definitely about elongating relationships.
Michael Pappas, do you think there are some models of interfaith collaboration that you see emerging from this crisis that will continue on even with the challenges that we know we're headed into in a different stage of this?
You asked a question of Rabbi Michael Lizak. Could this only happen in San Francisco? I think because of the nature of San Francisco, we're landlocked. We're considered like one of the most irreligious cities in the United States, and yet an organization like ours was called into existence by the city to address a homeless crisis and to be involved with disaster response, recovery, and relief. San Francisco is a unique place, and I think that interfaith gatherings and organizations emerge out of crises and develop these models. I will say that our form of doing interfaith work, and the reason we're able to respond now is because of the 30 plus years of relationship building that we've done. But the relationship building we've done has not been primarily through dialogue. It has been through service. And by bringing people of different faiths together to serve in the betterment of one's community, we learn about one another's faith on a real granular and organic way. And we build relationships of trust, which I believe are really the foundation for authentic dialogue. And so when tough times come, either we have to have tough conversations, or we have to assemble and mobilize to be able to address what we're doing now. It's because of those relationships. Those relationships are in place. I will tell you, I think we're all a little changed because of the Zoom culture that has taken over. I believe that post-pandemic, that congregations are going to continue to do this. Interestingly, because there's an equity issue even within Zoom. Whereas people who could not make it to worship because either they were elderly or they were or they were disabled, now are on the same par with folks who would come to worship regularly. People are finding some fulfillment there. There are challenges with Zoom worship with some of our sacramental churches in San Francisco, and that issue has emerged, and we've those faith leaders have used their prophetic voice to sensitize faith leaders. But I think we've learned a lot of lessons, and I think that we're not going to go back to whatever it was we were doing. San Francisco pre the pandemic was, very polarized in many ways. One was economically, and as Michael will tell you, there were a whole host of other issues. I think that we're going to go to something which hopefully is a lot more healthy than where we were pre-pandemic.
I was thinking, though, that religious institutions all across the country, though, have had kind of a reckoning of what does it mean to be a religious person in this time when you can't come to the physical space that has traditionally defined your religiosity. And so as people have done these things we've talked about, like the phone trees and the delivering of food to vulnerable people, I think some true meaning of religiosity has been reclaimed, right? And I'm the first one that loves singing in the choir and having cookies at the Oneg after services and so forth. But I also think that the model of, like Rabbi Heschel, of praying with our feet, of doing deeds that define us as religious people, has been lifted up. And I think that's been also sort of an interesting and hopeful part, and hopefully maybe a long-term impact.
Well, that takes on a whole new meaning with Rabbi Lizak's image of carrying the, I don't know if these are sourdough chalot that you're bringing around the streets, but it brought a smile on my face. We're coming up on the end of the hour, but I'd like to give you each, just to end on this hopeful note, because each of you in your own ways have shared very tangible stories about of why we must be hopeful, why we continue to need to, even with the great challenges that we're dealing with. Maybe you could each just leave us with a couple of sentences on what makes you hopeful for this year. Like what's helping provide you motivation that this will be a hopeful year for us collectively or within your community. Someone, maybe we'll start with you.
Sure. Thank you, Wayne. I think it's, every crisis, there are two things. So yes, it's a crisis, but it also gives us some unique opportunities like our wonderful panelists shared, in terms of interfaith. I think last year was very powerful. We attended all different Zoom meetings. We learned so much about different faiths and cultures, what they're doing, their practices. We did virtual tours of holy places. So, it was a year of growth and solidarity as well. And so I'm hopeful that we had this chance to be confined, be sheltered in place, and be in a position of repose and reflect. So we are coming out stronger. We are getting ready to face the world again. And like Michael said, that something has changed, and it is a positive change, that we are having a better understanding of ourselves and the world around us, our communities. So I think together we are moving towards a very positive, hopeful, optimistic direction to make a fresh start once again.
Thank you. Rabbi Lizak?
I'm thinking of one of the great success stories I know from mid-COVID of a Glide client who happened to be in Alabama with us in March, who had been unsheltered for many years, was living in a temporary shelter. When COVID came, his shelter was attacked by COVID. Glide helped him get into a shelter-in-place hotel, which allowed him to spend more time with his therapist, allowed him to see his doctor more regularly. He had reliable internet. He had a group of friends and built enough stability in his life to apply for and get a job at a Jewish nonprofit in San Francisco. And so I'm thinking about this, when we surround people with love and see the humanity in everyone, no matter what they're wrestling with, addiction or mental health challenges, and do everything we can to love them, then I think more stability can come and more hope will come from that.
Great story. Diane.
I was thinking of recommending to our listeners the book by Rabbi David Jaffe called "Changing the World from the Inside Out," right? And it's focusing on the ancient Jewish traditions, as we've been lifting up our traditions for modern times, of Musar, of studying your personal qualities that are the kinds of qualities like awareness and empathy and patience that allow you not to just improve yourself, but to improve yourself for the benefit of improving the world that we live in. And I think this has been a time when we've had this opportunity to focus on the development and the enhancement of those personal qualities that I think will serve us well when we come out.
Great. Michael Pappas.
Yes, I think that we should not take for granted our prophetic voice as faith leaders and the hope that we're called to bring. Just yesterday, I was invited to offer an invocation. Our Surgeon General here gathered faith leaders from throughout the state of California to talk about the vaccine, its rollout and its administration. But she did it in the context of the 500,000 mark that we hit as a nation of those who had died. And following the prayer, she paused and she said, "Thank you." And it just reminded me that we all have a role to play in this. And one of the roles that faith leaders have is to invoke prayer and to offer hope. And I think that that's our job during this. And I think that we will help navigate people back to connectivity through hope.
That's great. Shlomi, can I give you the final word after putting together this amazing group of colleagues of yours?
So Wayne, it's thank you for this opportunity, and thank you all for taking the time and be here today. Share your story, share your thoughts, and share with the wider community of what you've been doing for the past year for the sake and the benefit of the community. And for me, I will end with the word that I started with, which is togetherness. We are all together in this, and we have to stick together. And what I hope is that from this, traumatic experience of the past year, we'll stay together and we'll benefit. We'll just learn how to work better together in the future. Thank you.
Wow, what a great way to make it through. I guess this is hump day in the week, and it's always not that we really can keep track of the days in the week, but two program notes here. One is for Sunday, for those of you that like to join us and are looking for something fun to do. We have an amazing virtual guided tour of a museum that many people know as the Museum of the Jewish People in Tel Aviv. But you were about to find out that it has been rebooted and as part of an amazing new campaign and renamed Anu. So many of the themes, hopefully, that we discussed today will be presented in a much broader historical context. So come join us Sunday for this first sneak peek inside of the facility. It's really quite amazing. And the other program note, you all know, for those of you celebrating, tomorrow night is Purim, so we want to wish all of our viewers a happy and safe Purim. This is the holiday where it's actually a mitzvah to wear a mask, so maybe this year you can wear 2 or 3 as appropriate. We want to wish everyone a Purim Sameach, and indeed, in the spirit of this conversation, a safe holiday, a safe year, and open hearts to all those suffering as well. Thanks again. Everyone have a good week.
And maybe thank you to all the teams that work behind the scenes to make this event happen on your end and on the consulate's end. Thank you all for making it happen.
Absolutely.